In a single explosive interview, Rosie O'Donnell didn't just criticize Melania Trump. She ripped open the carefully guarded curtain around her marriage to Donald Trump, calling a mysterious business deal dressed in better lighting, and delivered a brutal takedown that sent shockwaves to the political world. The tension crackled in the air like electricity before a storm. Rosie O'Donnell sat across from her host, leaning forward with that familiar fiery intensity in her eyes. The studio lights bore down hot and bright, catching every twitch of her expression, every sharp gesture of her hands. Millions were watching live, phones already recording, as the conversation shifted from casual chat into something far more dangerous. Nobody expected her to go this deep, but once Rosie started, there was no turning back. She didn't ease in gently. She walked straight into fire. "I never looked up to him," Rosie said, her voice steady but loaded. "He was somebody who I thought was a joke." The words hung heavy in the studio. The host shifted slightly in his chair. The audience watching at home leaned closer to their screens. Rosie continued, recounting the old days of her talk show, how she refused to have Trump on for 6 years. The only exception? A charity sweepstakes bit where he literally swept the floor for a few seconds. "That's the only time I let him come on," she said with a sharp laugh that didn't reach her eyes. The camera zoomed slowly on her face as she painted a picture that felt almost surreal, a marriage so mysterious it looked more like a business arrangement with perfect lighting than a real love story. Her tone carried urgency, like someone watching a slow-moving disaster and wondering why no one had stepped in sooner. As the segment deepened, Rosie's words grew sharper. She described Donald Trump as lacking basic fundamentals of intelligence, someone whose behavior at a family dinner would be excused only because of clear cognitive decline. The studio fell into that special kind of silence, the kind where everyone realizes they're watching something that will dominate headlines for days. Rosie didn't stop at surface-level jabs. She pulled at one small thread, and the entire public image began to unravel. She revisited their long history. The feud that started years earlier, the wedding she attended as a +1 for a Broadway connection at the Plaza Hotel. He walked down the aisle shaking hands with celebrities like he was working the room, she recalled, her eyebrows raised. The details landed with cinematic precision, making the polished Trump brand feel suddenly cheap and performative. The conversation turned heavier. Rosie leaned into the financial story the public rarely heard in full. Bankruptcies, repeated struggles, ventures that didn't match the image of the unstoppable self-made billionaire. In her telling, it wasn't an inspiring climb to the top. It was someone placed halfway up the mountain still demanding applause for reaching the peak. Her hands moved expressively as she spoke, driving every point home. The host nodded along, the weight of her words settling over the studio like thick smoke. Then came the most personal strike of all. Rosie looked straight into the camera, her voice dropping with real concern mixed with unmistakable frustration. She suggested Melania Trump was living in a situation that demanded escape, that the carefully controlled public image of elegance and composure hid something much more complicated. The words weren't shouted, but they hit like thunder. Viewers could almost see the crack forming in the long-maintained facade of the Trump marriage. The studio lights seemed harsher now. Rosie's posture remained strong, shoulders squared, eyes locked forward. She described how Trump had threatened to sue her for 20 years but never followed through because, in her words, she had only spoken facts. He never had a woman stand up and say publicly exactly who he was, she added, letting the line breathe. The implication hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Tension kept rising as Rosie moved from personal history into broader political territory. She painted a picture of a man whose confident repetition of claims slowly blurred the line between truth and fiction. Media's role in building that image came under fire too. How powerful influence could make networks bend. How accountability sometimes gave way to business decisions. Her voice carried real intensity when she described threats to democracy, January 6 fears, and what she saw as dangerous patterns continuing in the current climate. She didn't hold back on global threats either. With world events growing more unstable, Rosie connected the personal to the national, warning about leadership that seemed unprepared for the dangers facing America. The hosts listened closely, the studio audience, visible in wide shots, shifting uncomfortably in their seats as the stakes fell higher with every passing minute. Rosie recounted stories of people living in fear, of policies that impacted lives in ways the public image tried to downplay. Her delivery stayed direct, unfiltered, and relentless. No softening, no careful wording, just raw observation built from years of watching and clashing with the same figure. The camera caught every detail. The way her jaw set when recalling old attacks, the slight forward lean when making her strongest points, the The way silence would fall after particularly cutting lines before the weight sank in. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It felt like a public reckoning. As the conversation reached its peak intensity, Rosie returned to Melania. She described the former First Lady's calm, distant public presence and openly questioned why she remained in the situation. The suggestion wasn't gentle advice. It landed as a stark challenge to the entire carefully constructed image the Trump family had maintained for decades. The studio air felt thicker. Even the crew seemed more alert, sensing they were witnessing a moment that would be clipped, shared, and debated endlessly. Rosie spoke about the surreal nature of it all, how celebrity, power, and personal relationships had become tangled in ways that felt almost unreal. She warned that willful blindness from supporters and media alike was allowing dangerous patterns to continue. Her voice rose with passion when addressing the larger stakes of the country, urging people not to ignore what she saw as clear warning signs. The host tried to steer the conversation at points, but Rosie's momentum was unstoppable. She circled back to the human cost, the personal behavior, and the long shadow this dynamic had cast over American politics. Every point built on the last, creating a rising wave of tension that kept viewers glued to their screens. In the aftermath of her strongest statements, Rosie sat back slightly, still composed but clearly fired up. The host exhaled, acknowledging the power of what had just unfolded. Outside the studio, social media was already exploding. Clips spread like wildfire. Headlines began forming in newsrooms across the country. The carefully protected image Rosie had targeted now faced new scrutiny. This wasn't just another celebrity interview. It was a direct, unapologetic assault on the Trump mythos. From the marriage dynamics to the business legend to the political dangers she believed he represented. Rosie O'Donnell had spoken with the confidence of someone who had been in this fight for decades and refused to stay silent. Melania Trump's famously composed public face was now part of a national conversation she never asked for. The contrast between her elegant, reserved image and Rosie's raw, urgent warnings created a dramatic tension that refused to fade. Whispers turned into debates. Private thoughts became very public arguments. As the segment ended, Rosie left no doubt about where she stood. Her final words carried both warning and exhaustion. A longtime observer who believed the country was sleepwalking into something dangerous. The studio lights dimmed, but the impact of her words only grew brighter. This clash revealed deeper truths about power, perception, image versus reality, and the courage it takes to speak uncomfortable facts out loud. In a world where polished performances often dominate, Rosie O'Donnell had flipped on the harsh lights and refused to look away. If this explosive takedown by Rosie O'Donnell left you stunned, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications right now. These are the moments that pull back the curtain on power, marriage, and politics in America. Do you think Rosie went too far, or was she finally saying what many have been thinking? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. The conversation is just getting started, and trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next.